chair and all.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome, and you're joining us at the Planning and Community Development Committee for Thursday, February 7, 2019. Are we all at the right meeting? Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay. So we'll acknowledge also this morning that we're meeting on the Seychelles Nation territory, and we'll call the meeting to order at 9:30. And could I have a motion first to adopt the agenda? Moved, seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. We have a presentation this morning. Maggie Scott, the president of the Chinook Swim Club. Maggie Scott, welcome. Did you want to step forward and make your presentation and introduce the other people with you?
I think Sarah's going to start.
Thank you and welcome. So you're on. Thank you.
So I'm the head coach of the Chinook Swim Club. We have a lot of programming that we offer to the community. We offer a Learn to Swim program with our novice. We offer 2 days a week for these young swimmers where they come and they create friendships in our program because they see each other every day for 2 weeks, Tuesdays and Thursdays for 2 weeks. They work on stroke improvement and have the opportunity to participate in swim meets, learn a little bit about what competitive swimming is. And we offer this program at a time right now where there's a shortage of guards to provide lessons. So it's another service that we're providing to the community. We have a cross-trainer program for athletes that want to participate in other sports as well. They come 2 times a week and get an introduction into competitive swimming, but they can also just do it as a fitness program as well. They're not expected to compete. Once they decide that swimming is their sport, they might want to enter into our junior or senior program. In the junior program, they train 4 times a week. In the senior program, they train 6 times a week in the pool and 2 dryland sessions as well, which is a total of about 9.5 hours of swimming. We have senior athletes that volunteer with our novice program. We're training or mentoring these athletes to become future instructors, whether if it's in Red Cross or in competitive swimming. Here they come and learn how to teach stroke improvement to young swimmers, learn how to keep their attention, and also entertain them at the same time. We have provincially ranked swimmers. This means that they've qualified for provincials, which is based on the fastest 50 swimmers in the previous year. We have goals for our athletes to go to provincials, junior nationals, nationals, Canada Games, and the North American Indigenous Games. We also actually have somebody that just qualified for junior nationals in short course, which is pretty exciting coming from a small club. We have a focus on physical and mental health in our club. We have a very cohesive team that's supportive and helps each other in developing goals, reaching them. When we go to swim meets, it provides an opportunity for our athletes to work on visualization, meditation, teaching self-awareness and mindfulness, because these are very stressful situations for these youth to be put into, and it makes them more self-aware and able to cope. I feel like these are life skills that will move on into their future endeavors, help them. So the long-term athlete development model is something that was presented to you in the handout ahead of time. We have athletes right now that are ranging into 15, 16 years old. And as you can see, it's really important that when they reach these ages that their training goes up to be competitive with other clubs in the Lower Mainland and across Canada. They need to be getting into the 12 to 20 hours of training. Currently, our highest number of hours of training is 9.5 for swimming. So we're asking for the SCRD to consider increasing our availability of lane rentals. Currently, there's a policy for this is our proposed schedule for September. Currently, there's a policy to always have 2 lanes open to the public. And so often we have about 8 to 10 swimmers in each lane. So if one person stops, the whole lane stops. And so when we're working on technique and endurance and that kind of thing, we really need extra space so that swimmers have the opportunity to improve in these areas. So with 8 to 10 swimmers per lane, it's not quite possible. And then the public lanes sometimes either has 0, 1, or 2 swimmers in those lanes. Our swimmers are also, a high proportion of them are also MyPass holders, so they are paying the monthly fee to be a MyPass holder, and they're paying swim club fees on top of that. And so we're asking for it to be a possibility to remove the policy to allow for more lane rentals. We are a large financial benefit to the SCRD. We pay, with our January financial income, it averages to $3,200 a month in revenue for the SCRD. Over our swim season, this would average to $32,200 over 10 months. And we're looking to extend our program into July and August, as this is when our championship meets are. Currently, we're training 9.5 hours in the pool. Next season, we'd like to move to 12, and then the year after this, we'd like to increase as well. So you can see we're bringing in a large portion of money for the SCRD on a consistent basis. We're asking that we be given priority in bookings when it comes to programming, because right now we're scheduled around lessons, which tend to fluctuate, determined by how many guards are available to run lessons at that time. On Saturdays, we train out of the Gibson's pool often because lessons are run in Seashelt, and our time for that can fluctuate between 1.5 hours and 2 hours, depending on when lessons need to start. So that's just some things we'd like to consider. In the morning sessions, we have an hour, a little less than 1.5 hours, and we go from 2 lanes, where we have about 7 swimmers, down to 1 lane when the Aquasize program begins. And there's 2 lanes beside us for public swim at this time. So we have 7 athletes that are all MyPass holders in 1 lane, varying from junior national ranking to provincial to Special Olympics, all swimming in 1 lane, passing each other. And it doesn't flow. You need to have more space for people to move out and be able to consistently perform the tasks. And then there's 2 lanes that are beside it for public swimming with 1 or 2 people per lane. And now I'll hand it over to Maggie.
Okay, so we're asking, following on from what Sarah's saying, we're asking for a reduction in lane fees. We currently pay some of the, I know I don't like we currently pay some of the highest fees in our province and in Canada. So Ken Redford, who's the Executive Director of Swim BC and has been a tremendous support to our club and our community, recently made us aware of a survey that was done by the Saanich Commonwealth Pool, and it was to determine the average lane fees across Canada, and what they came up with was $15 for a 50-meter lane pool. So to put that in context of our community pool, which is 25 meters, that would be $7.50 per lane per hour, and we pay $19, which is almost 3 times the amount. And then what we thought was we would look at other communities that are both rural or sort of local. So if you look at Penticton, they're at $7, Abbotsford 10, Powell River's $12.50, West Vancouver 11. This is a really prohibitive cost for us, and it doesn't allow us to expand our coaching services. So we can only afford to hire one head coach, and it also has increased our registration fees to an exorbitant amount in the last 2 years. That has a trickle down because it prohibits this being a sport that's accessible to our whole community. Ken Redford has also expressed a willingness to be a contact if there was any movement on the part of the SCRD to change some of these things. He has forwarded his contact information and would be happy to support. I think I go this way. The second thing I wanted to talk to you about today was the distribution of funds and services. So to give us a framework, if you look at, there's a lot of research to show the drop in youth participation in organized sports nationally. When you look at females in particular, that becomes more dramatic. And then when you look at female athletes between the ages of 10 and 16, there's a tremendous drop. So as recently as 2015, Statistics Canada did a study that showed that the rate of female athletes between the ages of 10 and 16 drops by 22% on average. And when you look at our club, which is a source of pride for us because we have an overwhelming amount of female athletes to males, so I think it's 49 to 22, respectively. Our retention rate for female athletes from the ages of 10 to 16 over the last 2 years has been 100%. So we have the ability to shift something that is overwhelmingly in the opposite direction across Canada. So in keeping with that, how we'd like to grow as a club is it would be great to have the access to the facility. And when you look at Seashell Pool, there's kind of the two divisions. So there's the lazy river side, and then there's the 25-meter pool section. We'd be talking about the 25-meter pool section. It would be great to have access to that whole facility for a day, maybe 2-3 times a year to run a meet. At this moment, we're not able to do that, and it really does not allow us to compete at the same level as some of the other clubs. And when we have athletes that are like now from our small club able to get to a junior national level, that's tremendous. But they don't have the ability to exercise as much as they'd like to because we can't access the pool. So we're asking, could we be supported similarly? If you were looking like at a hockey tournament, they would have use of the whole arena. We would need to, if we wanted to have a meet at the pool, have access to the whole 25-meter pool. And presently we're not able to. We share our time at all times with Public Swim. I think that's it?
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, so we've already talked about the need for lane space. So basically it comes down to the 2-lane policy. If we remove the 2-lane policy, I believe that will help solve that problem. The last thing that we'd like to talk about is the timing of shutdown. It happens in May currently, and we moved to Gibson's, which is a 20-meter pool. Competitive swim pools are 25 meters. We don't have starting blocks. The flags are not in the proper position, so swimmers are likely to hit their heads if they're not paying attention, because we use those to count our strokes into the wall. And so when we're preparing for these huge competitions in June, July, and August, and our pool shuts down in May, it can throw off all the training they've had up until this point. So we're asking that when considering the timing of shutdown, maybe we could get together and have a discussion about the possibilities. When I talked to Ken Radford at Swim BC, he said that late August, early September is when most pools shut down for the repairs. Recap. We would like to increase the number of lanes available to the club. We'd like to increase our lane rentals by 4 to 6 hours per week over the next 2 years. We'd like to reconsider shutdown of timing of the Seashell Aquatic Center and talk about a reduction in lane fees to adhere more closely with the provincial and national averages, thus allowing our club to grow by being able to hire more coaching staff. Thank you for considering ways in which we can improve our programming. The Youth and Special Olympics on the Sunshine Coast will excel in the sport due to the support of the SCRD and program facilitators at the Aquatic Center. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your presentation. And before we open for discussion, could I have a motion from the board to receive the materials provided? In addition, we need to add the 4 letters of support provided to you this morning on your table. Moved, seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Now, directors, what would you like to do? Questions? Open for discussion? Yeah. A few questions is fine, yep.
If
I may. Okay, so there were, I was just writing down a few things. First, I'd like to commend the club on recognizing the whole athlete with bringing in mindfulness practices, and I think that's fantastic. Considering the whole athlete, the mental preparedness as well as the physical preparedness. A couple of questions that came up for me. Why precisely are you not able to run a meet doing a pool rental, or if you could explain exactly what the challenges have been with that?
So currently there's the policy that there's 2 lanes open to the public at all times.
Okay.
And so when we run a meet, sometimes we can rent it out of 4 lanes, and there has to be 2 lanes available, but then swim lessons might start halfway through our meet, and then we can go down to 3 lanes. And then so it adjusts like that, where we can't just say, okay, this is the day that we're going to run a mini meet. We'd like all 6 lanes for 2 hours. We haven't run a big meet here yet that requires equipment and officials and everything like that. We run mostly mini meets for our young swimmers that aren't quite ready to travel off coast. We would in the future like to have a mini meet or a larger meet, but removing that policy to be able to book the whole pool for a portion of time to run a meet would be fantastic.
Okay. And if I may? Okay, and then I guess a couple of questions for staff through the chair. The shutdown, the timing of the shutdown every year, is that a contractual obligation as well? Does that, or is there a potential of changing the time of year that is?
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. There's nothing preventing consideration of a change for the shutdown time. There are a number of considerations, including the availability of water, but nothing to prevent reconsideration. Thank you.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. You've brought up some very good points. I think I'd like to see all of your concerns and questions, et cetera, be referred to staff so that they can look at the implications for the regional district. It sounds like, particularly around the meet piece, right, doing the swim meet, that there would need to be planning well in advance because, both on your side, but also around timing of swim lessons, for example. So that would have to be a longer-term conversation.
Okay, so I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I did a proposal to the SCR or to the pool. It was intended to be forwarded on, but we were told, actually, when Bruce Bowman was at the pool, he gave us a reduced lane rate of $14 an hour. And then we did registration for the following season, and then we were told once the season started that our rates were going up to $19 an hour. So we weren't able to budget appropriately. We had done a proposal for the growth of the club at this time, which was given into Karen Preston and Kim Watts, I believe. And we had meetings at that time in regards to all of this. And then let's see, so long ago.
So
I meet
lots of information is what you're saying.
Yeah, we've been meeting for 4 or 5 years with the pool on how to improve programming. Okay. And I meet with Kim in September, and we book everything for the year. So it's always the same. Our schedule never changes, except for when we get bumped around on Saturdays because of swim lessons or which pool we're going to be in. So our swimmers can't plan for where they're going to be swimming or what time they're going to be swimming because
So I guess what I'm requesting is that all of this information go to staff, and you could probably forward those other reports for further information to our GM.
Sure.
And then staff can come back to us with a report on implications, things like what happens if we change the time for shutdown, all those kinds of things on our end so we can actually assess it and evaluate it here at the board.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So that sounds like
that's a motion.
A motion, and you're able to capture all that, and including the four requests that were included in this presentation.
Yes, please.
Seconded. All in favor? Okay, in favor. Thank you. That's passed. So, and I want to thank you for your presentation. It's exciting to see. I mean, as the coast matures, these are maturing programs from a start and 2006, 2000, well, I forget, when did the pool actually start?
Well, our club actually started in 1989.
89, using
but
the Gibson's pool?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes, it would have been in Gibson's
Okay.
Pool
Yeah.
with Tibor originally. But it was, there was a period where it was competitive, and then it went to a very recreational club where we saw a lot of drop-ins. The registration was not consistent. It didn't support itself. We didn't have fully certified coaches. Now we do have certified coaches. We have a consistent program. We've got meets prepared. The whole season is set out in August for September to May or June, depending on who's going to what meet, provincials, etc. It's much more structured now.
Yeah. Well, it's great. It's great to see it. I mean, we're obviously a little bit suffering from success, and we need to look to the future. There needs to be looking at other recreational facilities on the coast, and we're seeing it, as you're aware, in all of our recreation programs. So that as we grow, the needs grow, and we need to look for the future ourselves. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Yeah, I just wanted, in your presentation, it was the Chinook success. It said in the last 2 years, the swim club is transforming into a competitive club. And I don't know the difference between a recreational and why did this happen?
Yeah. Okay, so as a recreational club, it was a social club. It was swimmers that came and we swam together and we improved our fitness, but there wasn't the commitment, there wasn't the set out program and the thought that went into it for what each individual athlete needs in training to prepare for meets such as provincials, junior nationals, that kind of thing. We only went to one swim meet a year, and it was just to kind of expose them to see what it was like. We go to all sorts of meets. So swimmers have to qualify. To go to a meet in the Lower Mainland, they have to be able to do a 200 IM, which is a fly back breast free, in under 4 minutes. And that's their first goal as a swimmer. And we still have a lot of swimmers that are aspiring to get there. So once they get there, and it's not out of their range at all to make that time standard, but it gives them something to work towards. And so that's what we're talking about when we go to competitions. It's something that requires planning, requires technique improvements. They have to be able to do it legally. It's all governed by FINA, which provides the rules and regulations. So when you watch the Olympics, for instance, you see officials on the deck and the timing equipment out. Like it's a big production. So those are competitions that we go to now. And now we go to about one competition every 4 to 6 weeks. Where before we went to one swim meet in Whistler at the end of the year, and it was more of a social, bring the group together kind of thing.
Right, so my main question is, why did this happen 2 years ago? What was...
We needed a person to step in as a leader. And most of our coaches are volunteers because they have other jobs. Rob's probably our best coach, and he's a dentist. And I was a swimmer. I actually got pulled onto the board like 4 years ago. 4 years ago, they're like, you're a good person for the job. And then we had a couple coaches, and it just didn't work out. And then they're like, you're a good person for the coach. And so I stepped into this role, and I have the time. And I've gone to coaching certification programs, and I've gone to conferences and trying to figure out how we can best run our club. And we've come up with a really fantastic model where we use multiple coaches, all with their expertise, and we fill in a program based on availability and what they can offer. So I have one coach on Friday that actually went to Worlds. She's an amazing swimmer. Katrina Walters she went to Worlds for backstroke. Robert's an amazing swimmer, national qualifier. Was an amazing swimmer, national qualifier. So we have all these people with all these talents that are coming together and offering a program for our youth that was never offered before. But that being said, we only have myself and one of our youth that is now in a coaching role that are paid because we can't afford to pay anybody else. And there are volunteers. They come one day a week. Well, Robert comes 3 days a week. But we have other volunteers that come 1 day a week. And one day they might say, I'm sorry, I just don't have time. But we have to be able to afford to pay for more coaches. And right now, our lane rates are bringing us down to the point where I do 50% of my work volunteer. They do all their work volunteer. And so that's what we're trying to work on to get towards that model.
I think what happened was we had swimmers see success, and then younger swimmers, see those people have success, and then all of a sudden we have a whole herd of kids that want to come to the pool. If you come to the pool on any evening or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday morning, you will see a whole bunch of kids, having fun, but B, swimming really, really well, and as a group, you go to a swim meet, who's cheering for their teammates the most? Our kids. Like it just fills me with pride to watch that, and that's what's happened. Success is just a little bit of success a couple years ago, and all of a sudden everybody else is like, well, I want to go to that meet, and then their friend wants to go to that meet, and then they all go to swimming more, and then they get better and better and better. And then it's a snowball that's happened, and that's what happened. It was really, it's really amazing to be a part of it. I just have to say, I leap out of bed the mornings I get to go coach. And if you show up on Tuesday, Thursday, or Saturday morning, I invite any of you to come see a workout. It's electrifying. They're going so fast. 6:06. I'll come pick you up.
These kids are swimming for like almost 2 hours, then going to school, then coming and working, and like coming back to swimming in the evening. Like they are working so hard. It's crazy.
And they're doing it. They're experiencing success. They're not gaming or any of that other stuff. They're working hard. It's great.
Well, thank you. As much as I'd like to continue this conversation, we have other business to go today. And thank you again. Thank you for your passion, and thank you for supporting Kids on the Sunshine Coast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Board, we're going to move on to the reports. And I'd like to commend and thank staff for not having 300 pages for this meeting. I think this is the first meeting we've had that has not been 300 pages. So that... and before we go, could we just have a motion to receive all of the reports this morning so that we moved, seconded? Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. That we takes care of that piece of business, which I often forget. So, first item then on the agenda is Annex B, and that's the Planning and Community Development Department 2018 fourth quarter and year-end report. Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Staff are pleased to provide this report as a summary of activities and statistics for the fourth quarter and year end. And specific highlights to note include an intergovernmental meeting with member municipalities in the Sechelt Nation to discuss regional growth coordination, progress on zoning bylaw 310 review with public workshops conducted, and that will lead into a questionnaire later this quarter. Our building inspection team trained for and is now using the 2018 BC Building Code, and a large number of applications were received in the fourth quarter in the lead up to the new code coming into force, and staff are now processing these. Cemetery maintenance was completed, including tree management work. There was helicopter delivery of stair and railing materials to Soames Hill Park for capital projects that will be completed this year. Annual sports field maintenance was completed, so that's aerating and sanding to manage turf compaction and encourage drainage. Dakota Ridge was opened with the aid of 35 volunteers. And we saw increased patronage in all 5 recreation facilities versus the year prior. Staff would be pleased to answer any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Questions from board? Director McMahon?
Yep, I got lots of little questions. Does cemetery maintenance include Elphinstone Pioneer Cemetery?
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair. So the maintenance I was referencing as a highlight was at Seaview Cemetery, but there is mowing and tree management work completed at Elphinstone Cemetery as well. I believe that occurred closer to the end of the third quarter in 2018 for tree work. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon again.
Bylaw 310 review. This is just a general comment. I'm a little concerned that, at least in the public participation, we're getting a lot of attention on short-term rentals and, a couple of issues that are pressing in the community, but we're not paying a lot of attention to opportunities to improve building standards in the rural areas. And so I would just like to see that we somehow bring some attention to that portion of the bylaw.
Were you looking for a response or just a comment?
Yeah, not at the moment. And then the community center visits at Gibson's, I was just wondering how they're measured, because I presumed that they include things like the Bylaw 310 presentation.
Mr. Hall, any comment?
Thank you, Chair. Staff believe that the methodology is that projected attendance is captured at the time that space is booked. So if a multi-purpose room is booked and there's an anticipated participation of 30 or 50, that's counted into the statistics. I'm not sure what happens if, as sometimes does, attendance exceeds the projected participation, but that might be that'll be a process piece that staff can look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other directors? I'm going to go to Director Hills for next question.
I'll do one or two and keep going. So page 9, it's talking about the future review of planning and development procedures and fees. Can you fill me in a little bit about where that is and what's happening? Oh, and by the way, thank you very much for the quarterly reports. It really helps me as a director to know the system and to answer the questions from the constituency. So I really do appreciate the quarterly report.
Mr. Hill?
Thank you, Chair. So the reference on page 9 is to a regular process of review of fees and procedures that's undertaken every few years. And staff would note in making that comment that fees for planning have not increased in a number of years. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ties?
Yeah, I'm just curious if you could just fill us in on sort of the process on the Bylaw 310 review and where in the process we are right now and what sort of the steps and the timelines are for the things coming up. Thank you.
Mr. Allen, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point, wrapping up the two consecutive meetings we had in December in Sechelt and Gibson's and reviewing some of the feedback which helped us guide our development of the questionnaire, which we intend on releasing later this month, ideally. So that is underway and under internal review. We are also presently working with our planning consultant to provide some initial policy direction on certain topic areas. And they continue to do some review in the background in order to begin the preparation of preparing a new draft. Certainly, review of the questionnaire will form a significant portion of the draft, so the draft itself isn't prepared at this time, but we're moving in that direction, at which time, when there is one available, we'll be reporting it to both committee as well as recommending additional public consultation opportunities. So we are moving along. We're in the phase 2 of our portion. We also would like to reach out to specific focus groups of various topic areas, and it's a big project, and we're moving along. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up on the Gibson's Rec Center, that it would be helpful to have even a rough breakdown of the different types of usage of the facility, because I know we have, for instance, public meetings there, and the Bridge Club meets there, and the Youth Drop-In Center is there. So it'd be interesting to know, what percentage of the people using the rec center are using it for essentially meeting space versus recreation.
Okay, is it possible to do that, Mr. Hall?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff are always looking to improve the quality of information, and so staff can investigate how better to present the material to give a sense of how facilities are used. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Seegers?
Thank you. Given you're looking at your zoning bylaw and you bump up against the boundaries of the municipalities and the Sechelt Nation, will this also include consultation with municipalities so that we can look at how it transitions? Because we'll have to have, it's a transition zone that needs to be looked at. Thank you.
Mr. Allen?
Yes, thank you, Chair Beamish. Absolutely, we will be consulting with all local governments, provincial levels of government as well, with interests on Sunshine Coast. And staff have had initial conversations, for example, with Vancouver Coastal Health and their Healthy Communities Division, and certainly we'll be reaching out to municipalities as well. Thank you.
I have just a follow-up question to that. Will that conversation take place as a meeting or a referral?
Yes, thank you, Chair Beamish. Excellent question. I would suggest both. Certainly when we do have a draft of an entire zoning bylaw which is presented on committee, much like the development of an OCP or even a private application, we will be recommending a host of referrals. Having said that, it would benefit our team to have conversations with planning divisions at Gibson's and Sechelt, for example. So I would say both.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. That'd be helpful. Thank you. Director McMahon.
I just wanted to thank staff for the follow-up on the frontage waivers, which was so exciting that it made the Coast Reporter. Thanks.
Director Hiltz.
I'll do one final one. It's about the bookings. This is page 19. It's field bookings. So what I'm trying to kind of understand is the relationship between bookings and the actual number of field hours of use. I understand that a booking might be for 1 hour and they might not show, and so I'm thinking asset management in the back of my mind. The more the field is used, the more you have to invest in the field. So is there a translation from bookings to hours of use, or the metric that you use to kind of understand how much a field is being used?
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair. Similar to the prior question about recreation center statistics, this might be an area where a different presentation of data could be helpful. However, staff would also note that the performance of fields and the impact of hours of use on a field is the product of a number of factors beyond just hours of use: precipitation, soil conditions, maintenance regime, temperature, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks as well. And so there may be other ways that information about field condition could be provided in addition to just hours of use, but staff will consider the question as an opportunity for improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. See no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Hall. We'll move on to Annex C, which is the LCRB endorsement application for lounge and picnic area, Sunday Cider Company. And Mr. Sayo.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. The SCRD received a request from Sunday Cider Company to review its applications to the BC Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, LCRB, for endorsement of a food and beverage lounge and a picnic area. The food and beverage service lounge is proposed to be located next to the cider production facilities in an area on the south half of the property. The lounge will have an indoor floor area of 100 square meters and an outdoor patio of 50 square meters. Each area has a seating capacity for 30 people. The proposed use and the size and capacity of the lounge meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw. The proposed picnic area is to be located south of the lounge. The zoning bylaw does not provide specific regulations for picnic area associated with an alcohol production facilities in the agricultural zone. However, policies of the Agricultural Land Commission permit picnicking in an open air area, and the proposed size of 1,000 square meters and the capacity of 30 people for the picnic area meet the requirements of the LCRB. Surrounded by forested areas and large agricultural and rural properties, the site is physically isolated, and the natural barrier helps to barrier potential noise, visual, and other disturbances that could be generated by the facility. And sufficient parking is to be provided on site, and the Ministry of Transportation has not identified any concerns with using the existing access of the Sunshine Coast Highway. A wastewater treatment system has been installed. The applicant is to use on-site creek water for the orchard irrigation and rinsing of the apples. Regional water will be primarily used to clean the cider production tanks. Both the Elphinstone Advisory Planning Commission and the Agricultural Advisory Committee support the proposal. So staff recommend that the SCRD indicate support for this application to LCRB. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Does directors have any questions or about the report? Director McMahon?
Well, I had the opportunity to attend both the Agriculture Advisory Committee and the APC, and was very favorably impressed by the presentation. So I don't think I do have any further questions of staff.
Okay. I see the proponents are in the room. Would you like to comment at all? This is an area, interesting area. The cider is interesting, so please come forward. Come forward and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thanks for allowing me to speak.
Your name?
My name is Clinton McDougall from Sunday Cider, and my partner is Patrick Connolly over there. We came today as observers, but I'd be happy to maybe give a little bit of brief background on the project, if that's...
You can be very brief.
Very brief.
Thank you.
Well, I know that some of you have attended the meetings, but I'll briefly say where we've come from, where we are, and where we'd like to go. But Patrick and I started making cider around 5 years ago after he returned from England, and I had recently opened a restaurant. And we did it on our day off, which is Sunday. We were given an opportunity to make cider commercially in a shared space with some wine production and mead production in Vancouver, and we did that as a small side project. Fast forward a couple years and a couple batches later, and we had both increased our education on cider, taking professional courses. We had received a Sustainable Food Investment Co-op award to buy some equipment, and my family and I had purchased this property on the Sunshine Coast, not only to raise our families, but to grow apples, which is a vision that we've long held. So we have received our approval in principle to convert a small cottage into a cider facility. We've cleared 8 acres of land and have 500 apple trees that we're looking to get in the ground, and there's an existing heritage orchard there. So all that is very much in process, and where we'd like to go is this food and beverage service lounge, where it can be a place for people to experience the cider there, but also we're right in the middle of this Elphinstone Farm Belt, and we want to showcase some of the food that happens there alongside of it. So that's really our vision, is a family farm and orchard, and being a part of the agricultural community and a place that can showcase what's going on here. So, and just a small note on the application and the water use. In our application, we do have a creek with water rights on the property that we have been using residentially for our own gardens, and but that's something that we would have to change our license for it if we were to use that for a commercial orchard. So just a small note, that's something that we're looking at, but we also have rainwater catchment. So.
Well, thank you. Does raise any questions with the board? No. Okay. So we have a motion. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, just a statement. I was at the agricultural advisory where you did a presentation, and what the sense I got from the room is you guys have a lot to learn about how to do agriculture on the Sunshine Coast, bears and deers and electric fencing and things like this, and there's a lot of help out there. So I think people are very interested in helping you guys learn from the experience of well over 100 years of agriculture on the Sunshine Coast. So I'm happy to see that going forward. Yeah.
Thanks. We feel fortunate with the knowledge that is out there, and we are greenhorns when it comes to orcharding.
Okay, board. There's a motion recommended that the SCRD respond to the LCRB, indicating support for the proposed lounge and picnic area endorsement. Somebody care to move that? Director McMahon, thank you. Second? Second, okay, thank you. Okay, so that motion is on the table. A question?
It's actually a staff question about the report, not specific to the motion. So it was... it's following up in this is Sunday Cidery went through a procedure. Does the regional district have a fee structure for processing alcohol processes and a procedure? Just kind of looking around the province, some places charge $100, some people charge $750. So they take staff time and resources. I'm wondering what kind of cost recover from a processing of a request for a lounge endorsement.
Mr. Allen?
Yes, thank you, Chair Beamish. That's an excellent point and would factor into our previously mentioned review of fees and procedure bylaw. As at present, we do not have a fee service for this or a fee recapture, and it is something that may well be suitable for us to look into moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that? Oh, we have the Director McMahon.
I just have one final comment, and that is that I'm really happy that Sunday Cider has been proactive about reaching out to the neighbors, because as we know, this can be a difficulty. So, bravo.
Thank you.
Okay, a motion on the floor. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. It's carried. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to Annex D, and this is the park dedication, Lot 6, Largo Road Subdivision, Electoral Area D. And Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. A subdivision application has been received by the SCRD for a 7.57 hectare vacant parcel of land known as Lot 6, Largo Road, located in Roberts Creek, Area D. The application utilizes the existing R2 zone and E subdivision district and base OCP land use designation to propose a 13-lot zoning compliant subdivision with minimum 4,000 square meter parcel sizes, and the overall subdivision having an average of 5,000 square meters per parcel. The Roberts Creek OCP supports additional parkland in this area. With zoning compliant subdivisions that create 3 or more additional lots, the Local Government Act requires up to 5% of the land or monetary value of the land to be provided for park purposes. The subject parcel, known as Lot 6 Largo Road, contains lands desired for park purposes that are in excess of what could be achieved through this standard 5% dedication requirement. In recognition of the value of portions of this site as park, staff have worked with the applicant to create an option that to maintain the proposed 13 lots while providing the desired areas for park purposes. This option proposes a combination of approximately 2.3% of the land to be dedicated as park at the time of subdivision and approximately 2.7% of the land value to be secured as a monetary contribution to the SCRD's Parkland Reserve Fund. Beyond the statutory 5%, an additional 8,848 square meters of land, or about 11.8% of the total parcel area, would be secured for donation through a covenant. In total, this proposed option would provide a combined land and monetary value of 16.8% of the subject site to the SCRD's park system. Of this, approximately 14.1% would be provided as land for park on the subject site, and the balance of 2.7% would be provided in cash. The proposed new park area is directly adjacent to existing parkland consisting of 2 parcels commonly referred to as the Co-Housing Park and Trail and the Roberts Creek Legion Trail. If acquired, the proposed new park area would adjoin both of these existing parks, giving the SCRD full ownership of the lands between Roberts Creek and Clatt Creek for the entire north-south length of the subject parcel. The proposed new park area would additionally provide a physical connection with existing Roberts Creek Legion Trail and Largo Road, and provide future opportunities to construct a trail loop for viewing the confluence of the creeks, and the potential for future construction of a bridge connection across Roberts Creek to the lands between the creeks. Staff recommend that this park acquisition option, which is referenced as option 1 in the staff report, be pursued as it offers parkland of an amount and in a location that is consistent with the objectives of the OCP and follows the direction of the Roberts Creek Advisory Planning Commission. This option also provides an additional monetary contribution to the SCRD's Parkland Acquisition Fund. Staff note that this option is voluntarily in excess of the statutory maximum requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Directors, do you have any questions? Director Taz?
Yeah, thank you to staff and to the developer for coming up with a solution on this piece of land between the 2 creeks, and I think it's very much a favorable outcome, and I'm very pleased with being able to secure that land as for public use and as parkland, and so. That's a very positive outcome of this whole application. I just want to give a little bit of history on the Largo Road case. The application, of course, was filed with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure as the norm in rural areas, and they have decided that the best course of action would be to actually put Largo Road through, and so to connect the 2 ends of Largo Road. And there's been a somewhat resounding concern about that plan, as it would create the shortest distance or the shortest route between the heart of Roberts Creek and the town of Gibsons, and also be sort of a shortcut to go up to the B&K Road, which is sort of the extension of Largo Road as you cross the highway. So the APC, the OCP committee, and a number of local residents have all spoken against having this road put through. And therefore, I would like to add a recommendation to this, and I believe Autumn already has it in her notes, but I'll read it out here. And that concerns received from the APC, the OCPC, and in correspondence from area residents related to the potential safety, traffic, and noise impacts of the construction of Largo Road as a through road be conveyed to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So this would be a part of the referral package I have sent all the letters of concern to staff and to be added to that referral package. So that's the recommendation I would like to add to this.
Staff, that would appear to be a recommendation 3 on the page as opposed to a C under recommendation 2. Would that be correct?
Thank you, Chair. Staff would agree that adding it as a third point would be appropriate.
Okay.
It may also be appropriate for added specificity to indicate that it's the Area D, Roberts Creek, APC and OCPC. Thank you.
Yeah, that's acceptable. So I'd like to make that a motion. And
you move all? Would you move the?
I'd like to move all of them. Yeah, and then add that third motion there.
Okay. Just read that for the benefit of everybody. That the SCRD accept the following conditions as part of the proposed 13-lot residential subdivision as outlined in option 1 of the report, and that the maximum 25%. Maximum statutory 5% park requirement of a combined form of approximately 2.3% land dedication and approximately 2.7% market value monetary contribution towards the SCRD future park acquisition reserve, and a donation of additional 8,848 square meters of parkland. And the other portion of the resolution, please, can you read that, Autumn?
And further, that concerns received from the Roberts Creek Advisory Planning Commission, Roberts Creek Official Community Plan Committee, and in correspondence from area residents related to the potential safety, traffic, and noise impacts of the construction of Largo Road as a through road be conveyed to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure.
And with the addition to Area E, is that of Area E? No, okay. Okay, did everybody understand the resolutions? We have a seconder? Seconded. All in favor? Approved. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next item of the agenda is Annex E, and this is the development permit application DP 000061 for Bonnybrook Industries, and Sven Koperitz, planning technician, or Andrew Allen.
Yes, thank you, Chair Beamish. I will introduce this application. This is an application to construct a new storage building for the Bonnybrook Industries, which is located on Stewart Road within Westhouse Sound. It is intended for the storage of materials and goods related to the Bonnybrook Industries business. Building exposure from Stewart Road is limited due to the configuration of the wide road allowance, and the view is blocked by an existing fence. But nonetheless, the property is located within a development permit area for form and character, as well as for aquifer and protection and stormwater management. So to meet the guidelines relating to the appearance, there are appearance of the building recommendations, as well as some landscaping, which may involve the installation of trees, as well as the removal of some impervious surfaces. And we recommend that a landscape plan be required to be submitted and reviewed prior to issuance of a development permit. And there are a number of items noted on page 46 of the agenda which would relate to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Going first to Director Hiltz, do you have any questions?
Yes. Thank you, Chair, and thanks, staff, for the report. It's good to see things happening up in the industrial area there. One of my main questions is about the aquifer protection and stormwater management in light of that this area is like a dead-on target for the Soames and the Grantham's well capture areas. So how do these parts fit together with this application?
Mr. Allen?
Yes, thank you, Chair Beamish. In this particular case, the form and character development permit area is a development permit which must be issued through board resolution, whereas all other development permit areas can be issued by general manager or manager based on delegation bylaw. So with respect to this development permit area for aquifer protection, we will be looking to the results of the contaminated sites profile review through the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. The results of that may well end up with the removal of contaminated soil and material, which could improve the hydrological components of the property. We'll be looking at the installation of native vegetation, noting that the building is also going to be constructed on top of a surface which is presently impervious, so it's not going to be adding to the overall coverage of impervious surfaces. However, noting that this building, of course, has a roof and there's additional stormwater which can be managed and noted through the building permit review as well. So there are a number of factors which we will consider. The building at present does not contain a proposal for plumbing, for washroom, or whatnot, so there's no increased demand at this point on the sewage system. Should that change, or should building permit review indicate that plumbing is required, we will certainly ensure that the disposal system is consistent with the municipal sewage regulation and a plan filed with Vancouver Coastal Health and shared with us. Thank you.
Director Hilstad.
Just to follow up the time frame on the Environmental Management Act and contaminated sites, what kind of turnaround are we looking at on that type of information?
Mr. Allen?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. I'm not able to answer with absolute certainty, as it is a process controlled by the Provincial Ministry of Environment. However, it would be a condition of prior to issuance, so the owner would have to work through that process prior to us issuing permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
I was just curious. The diagram on page 48 appears to show the new building entirely blocking access to the property, so I assume that's very approximate.
Mr. Allen?
Yes, thank you. Excellent question. There will be some variability in there, and also noting on the property that many of the items shown in the aerial photo are movable, potentially boats and trailers and other things that may well be adjusted in order to finalize all outstanding items on the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lamb, go ahead.
I was just wondering, is there a limit to how many buildings you can put on one of these industrial properties? And is there a specific coverage that, you can cover the property?
Mr. Allen?
Yes, thank you, Chair Beamish. Some of our zones do indicate that there be only one principal building or X amount of square meters per additional building. However, for the industrial zones, it's primarily regulated on parcel coverage, and in many cases that can be up to 50% coverage. And that's our, under the present zoning bylaw, that's our primary regulation for these types of zones, would be parcel coverage. Thank you.
Thank you. Just an observation myself. I'm always concerned when the front door of the community starts to look like an industrial site, and we certainly have that here with the potential of this area, and just over time looking at how this can be improved and how this can be somewhat beautified as an entrance to our community, because it can be a very important entrance. Bypass could go by it, of course, but still is our front door. Thank you. Well, we have resolution or recommendations on page 46, and there's several of them there. And Director Hills, would you?
Yeah, a motion to they've already been received, but to move forward with the application.
With the recommendations?
Yes, please.
Okay. Seconder, please. Seconded. All in favor? Opposed? None? Thank you. It's Approved. Okay, moving now to Annex F, and this is the license of occupation renewal for Ocean Beach Esplanade. Mr. Adams, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. The SCRD received a request from the province to renew a foreshore license of occupation along the Ocean Beach Esplanade in Elphinstone. The license covers an area of approximately 52 hectares of foreshore, that is, lands covered by water below the high tide mark. Ocean Beach Esplanade is a popular and scenic recreation area, and the purpose of the license is to affirm the usage of the area for recreational purposes such as swimming or beach use. The license is supported by the Elphinstone OCP, and the SCRD has held that license for the past 30 years. Provincial staff have confirmed that the SCRD are not obligated to take on additional risks and concerns of marine debris cleanup or shoreline erosion under this license. The benefit of the license is that it helps protect the area from non-recreational development, such as aquaculture use. Staff recommend renewing the license for a period of 10 years, as recommended in option 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Discussion. Any discussion by the board? Director McMahon?
I was just curious that this wasn't referred to the area EAPC, since it is a very important part of Elphinstone and a keystone of the OCP.
Who would like to answer that?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. So there are two considerations played into staff's process here. One would be timeliness, the need to proceed with the renewal, and the second is that it's continuing the status quo. Staff would suggest that had a change been considered, or a recommendation for change, that referral would form part of that process. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question, and that is regarding the impact of climate change on that waterfront and the bank. There's a lot of trees that are in the process of falling down on that bank there. Do we have any liability by taking on that responsibility for the protection of that bank, and are we doing anything about the protection of that bank? Mr. Hall.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Most of the treed area, if not the entirety of the treed area, is within the road right-of-way and the responsibility of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. Staff have, on occasion, when observing a hazard, conveyed that to the Ministry for follow-up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That being said, I was walking down there a couple of weeks ago. There's a number of trees that I guess the last storm really attacked the roots, and they're just very precarious right now. But the other aspect of that is that I know that the town of Gibsons is applying for remediation funding under the National Disaster Mitigation Fund, which was able to access as a result of the last storm. And we had damage ourselves down at Georgia Beach, and we're looking at doing some repairs down there. It's quite a long stretch of beach. The road's in terrible conditions along there. It needs to be fixed, but the trees, many of the trees that are standing last fall are roots exposed today and won't sustain too much more weather. So it's something that I would be concerned about in the sense that it may even take out and undercut good portions of that road down there, which impacts access to the properties. Director McMahon?
Well, what you said, but I actually am considerably more concerned about this section from Secret Beach to Chester House, which is at the top of the bluff there. That bluff is very unstable. It's undermined by stormwater problems, illegal tree cutting, dumping of yard waste, private paths and stairways, which are probably illegal, I don't know. knotweed, and on it goes. And I take it this is probably outside our jurisdiction, but believe me, I hear a lot about it. So I don't know if there's anything that we can do in terms of a strategy for being proactive about managing this area, but it would be helpful.
Director Hiltz?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Kind of just broadening out the scope. I'm interested in the uniqueness of this in the regional district, and are there other areas that have been looked at from a foreshore lease as a protection of recreation areas? Is there something that people are looking at or have been looked at? So the uniqueness, and are there other areas?
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair. Staff are just conferring and believe that this is unique in the regional district.
Follow-up?
The follow-up, is this unique solution potentially a solution for other areas too? This is kind of restricts what could happen on the use in the future. So is there another place that people have contemplated that this might be a suitable tool?
Mr. Hall?
Staff aren't aware of the regional district contemplating this in areas. This is a relatively, as we understand from the province, a relatively unique situation. Such types of licenses are not commonly granted today, and should the regional district give this up, there was an implication from the province that such a license might not be granted again. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Staff may not know the answer to this, but I'm just curious if there is a bit of history there. Like, was there a proposal for a fish farm or something that, spurred this to happen in the first place?
Mr. Hall?
Staff aren't aware of specific history. It is a unique, amongst rural areas on the Sunshine Coast, it's a relatively unique facility in the sense that there's an esplanade with shared upland property. So that may be a contributing factor in that unique history.
Okay, the board, we have 3 resolutions proposed. What would you like to do with those? Director McMahon?
Yes, I'd like to move staff's recommendation to renew the lease.
Thank you. Seconded? All in favor of the recommendations? Opposed? None? Thank you. It's approved. Okay, moving on to Annex G, which is the fitness equipment replacement, RFP 18352 award report. And Karen Preston or Mr. Hall? I'll take either one.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. In the 2018 annual budget, a project was approved for the replacement of fitness equipment in recreation facilities, much of which dates to facility opening and is now at the end of its life. Through RFP 18352, bids to supply and install new equipment and remove or trade in existing equipment were gathered. The list of new equipment that was specified was informed by a survey of patrons. Staff recommend award to the 3 firms noted in the report for a total contract value of up to $209,344, which is within the approved project budget. As well, through the bidding process, staff identified and negotiated a community benefit donation for a small portion of the surplus equipment to be donated to the Seashell Nation. Suppliers have agreed to make this donation and provide assistance with installation at no cost. Following board decision, contracts will be arranged and communication to patrons who are very much interested in the arrival of new equipment will flow. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Hall. Discussion? Director Seegers?
I'm just going to move the recommendations.
Okay, we'll move the recommendation. Seconded. All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? Hearing none, thank you. And thank you for your report. I apologize, too, for my confusion when I read it first, but we discussed that through at the meeting yesterday. So moving next to Annex H, which is the Whispering Firs Park name change request. Who's going to discuss that? Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair. SCRD received a request from the Wood Creek Park Neighborhood Association to change the name of Whispering Firs Park to Wood Creek Park. Whispering Firs is a community park in Elphinstone, adjacent to the Wood Creek Park subdivision. The WPNA's stated goal for the name change is to create continuity between community subdivision name and park name, thus enhancing the sense of community identity. The association was also motivated by the lack of a Wood Creek Park neighborhood sign, although staff would note, since the report was written, a new neighborhood sign has been installed at the entrance of the subdivision, which, if the directors have traveled on Highway 101, you may have noticed. The park naming policy, which is attached to the report, allows for parks to be named by subdivision, meaning that the name Wood Creek Park would fit within the guidelines. Staff recommend that if a name change is considered, that stakeholders in the community be consulted on both a new name and the current name, including opportunities to preserve the Whispering Firs name if that is seen as of value. This would be good process, allow for informed decision-making by the board, and is in keeping with SCRD's public participation approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Discussion? Director McMahon?
Thank you. I have been in touch with the Wood Creek Park Neighborhood Association about this, and I've also been in touch with Rod Moorcroft, whose daughter named the park. He's on the APC as it happens, so referral to the APC I think would be appropriate and would make sense here. I very much like the suggestion to name a feature in the park Whispering Firs in order to continue that name and the little history of it. There's a plaque in the park explaining the history of how the park was named, and it's very nice. And the suggestion seems popular with the residents as well. The only additional thing that they mentioned is that the bus stop names in that area are a little confusing, and I didn't thoroughly research this, but apparently at various times the bus stops on both sides of the highway there are called Wood Creek Park, Ocean View, or Whispering Firs. And so my kind of sense of that would be pick one. But perhaps you could refer that to Transit to clarify. But otherwise, I think it's a good report. I support it.
And do you move the recommendations?
Sure. I will move those recommendations, adding a referral to the Area E APC.
I think it's already in there. Sorry. So we don't need to have that addition. No. Once named, though, adding to Transit perhaps could be referring to Transit could be a good idea. So, seconder. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None? It's passed. Thank you very much. And Annex I, Child Care Planning Grant for the Sunshine Coast, District of Sechelt additional clause. So speaking to that will be Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair. In January, the board expressed support for a regional approach to a child care planning grant application, with the District of Sechelt as the lead. UBCM, as the grant funder, has subsequently indicated that wording authorizing the District of Sechelt to apply on behalf of the regional partners is required. Accordingly, the supporting partners, SCRD and the Town of Gibsons, are asked to add an additional clause to their earlier expression of support. And staff are aware that the Town of Gibsons is working through the same process. And so staff recommend this additional clause be added to that earlier expression and remain prepared to support the project through in-kind resources. Thank you.
Director Seegers?
I move the recommendation as presented.
Seconder? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none? Thank you. It's Approved. Annex J, 2019 High Ground Center for Civic Governments Forum. Absent Tracy, Angie, were you going to comment on this? Or?
Thank you, Chair. I can. The purpose of this report is really just to solicit interest in attending the conference and to seek the committee's approval or authorization of expenses and remuneration coverage. Thank you.
Okay, any directors interested in attending? Okay, so Mr. Lamb, are you not interested in attending? Well, I guess that my understanding of this is that directors who are on the board for the rural areas would be compensated and paid for by the board, and other directors would be through their municipality, so that the naming the directors. Mr. Lee, were you interested in that? Sounds like I should be. Chair Pratt, Director McMahon, Director Ties, Director Hiltz.
I'm going to put my name there. That there is possibly some other things, so if I don't put it on, I don't have the option. So I'm putting my name forward as the option. And last time this came before the board last year, I did see the chair of the time, which was the Sechelt representative, named in that motion. So don't know what that means in terms of the who pays.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I think there was some clarification when we came in this time around. I am registered for this conference, and it will be paid by the municipality.
Yeah, I believe that if I was to register, it would be paid by the municipality as well. So with those directors named in the resolutions, somebody move the resolutions? Sorry, Director Seegers.
Clarification, are you listing all of the rural area directors then?
Yes, they have to all be
Okay.
approved in here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And, sorry. Director Hiltz?
Director Julius is not here. Is he?
We'll list him in there anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, he would have the option of going. Again, his being a municipality, sorry. Yeah.
Just a point on the final point of this, it discusses if the directors will be paid stipend and expenses. I'm in favor of being paid expenses, but the stipend question I'd like to have a little more discussion on.
Well, moving the first resolution then is that they be authorized to attend. All the rural directors be authorized to attend. Somebody move that. Second? All in favor? Okay, the second resolution then, the directors who attend forum be paid stipend and expenses. Discussion?
I'd like to actually ask staff, through the chair, what the previous previous boards have done, please.
Corporate officer, do you know?
Thank you. So in the remuneration bylaw, the stipend for a conference attendance is roughly $150 a day. I think it's probably around $160 at this point. And it has varied between different conferences, but traditionally the stipend is requested as part of these attendances in recognition that you may be giving up paid employment for the day or other sources of income. Thank you.
Okay. Director McMahon?
It raises an interesting question. I was just wondering if there are, I always thought there were sort of like core conferences like AVICC and UBCM that are, assumed, but presumably we could attend endless numbers of conferences if we were really dedicated to doing it. So I guess we'll have to feel our way through this.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I know in the municipality, and I have to say I haven't looked as clearly at the regional district expense bylaw. We can claim either a daily expense, or if the meals, for example, are covered off at the conference, then those are covered off and we don't get the daily, right? So it's if we cover off our own meals, then we get the the daily stipend. So there's a,
you're talking stipend being different than expenses. Stipend
Yes.
in this case would
Yes.
be a meeting payment.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so it
Yeah.
depends on how
Right.
the
Yeah.
expenses are actually allocated or how they happen.
Yeah. Director Pratt.
Personally, I'm okay requesting expenses. I'm not. For myself, I'm not requesting stipend. It's I can work electronically while I'm away, so for me, it's not an issue. I don't know how the other directors feel about that, but I'm okay with just having my expenses covered, and I don't require the additional stipend.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. So if this was approved as presented, it's actually up to each director then to either put in for the stipend or not. Right, so you have the option.
Director Legault, sorry. Corporate Officer Legault.
Thank you. So for clarification, because staff do the time entry on behalf of directors for conference attendance, in the remuneration bylaw, it's automatically that the daily remuneration rate be paid for conference attendance for UBCM and AVICC. We require a resolution for special conferences such as the High Ground Conference. Expenses for meals, I agree with Director Seeger's comments. Our bylaw is similar in expense policy in that if meals are provided for the conference, you wouldn't claim for them, but if they're not provided and you have to purchase them, you would expense them. So there are costs that would be expensed, which may be meal, mileage, ferry, and then there are payments that staff would process as part of the time entry remuneration, and that's the conference attendance. So we kind of need to know in advance which directors would be paid the stipend, the daily rate, which is, I just have the bylaw open here, $158.54 a day.
Okay, Director Mann.
I would like to go forward with a recommendation as written. However, it probably would be educational for all the directors to get a report maybe at the end of 6 months, sort of itemizing what expenses we have run up so that we can understand that better. I know that we get a total, but it would be helpful to see what these conferences cost so that we have a better sense.
Director Hiltz?
I'm okay with it the way it is right now. I understand it's a 26.5-hour, totally intensive. You're not going to sleep, and you might not have time to do any telecommuting. You're going to be quite focused, I think, and I would expect directors to be focused on the task and the conference at hand rather than having to worry about recouping some employment expense. So I would be supporting the recommendations as they are.
And will you be moving the recommendations?
Do we have, I thought Chair Pratt, did you
No,
move
it hadn't
them?
been moved, no.
I'm happy to move them, yes.
Okay, seconded. Any further discussion? Chair Pratt?
Just a quick note that Director Seegers and I will be presenting at the conference, so we're going to be having a pechakucha, so it's going to be fun.
Okay, so we have the moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none? Thank you. Yep. Okay, moving to, Annex K on the agenda, the Advisory Planning Committee meetings of January 22nd. And this is, the Agricultural Advisory Committee meeting. Somebody care to move those? Director Hiltz?
I'd like to say something about this one. If we can pull one of the recommendations out of this, we've moved the acceptance of the minutes.
We can, yep.
I just wanted to draw some attention to recommendation number 3. at the last AAC, there was some discussion going on about what the AAC wants, and they seem to be wanting to kind of come up with 3 areas that they need to focus on for their remaining term, and they'd like some kind of policy, strategic direction of how to focus. And it was unclear to me what they really wanted, but they seem to want a little bit more direction from the board as to what agricultural advice the board wants from this committee. So if we could have maybe a bit of discussion about that.
Okay, discussion. Director McMahon first.
I could expand upon that slightly. We were talking about the agricultural area plan, and it is a packed document full of recommendations, many of which, in my opinion, are not actionable. And I suggested, as one possible starting point, that they just dive in and pick 3 that they thought were doable and within the SCRD's mandate to take a look at and see if they could make any progress. But that's just one suggestion.
Director Seegers?
I think it was behind this, and I have to figure out how I'm going to say this. They had indicated that previously they had attempted to bring ideas and priorities to the board, and they were not favorably received. So they were hesitant to actually put their ideas forward. I reminded them that we have a new board here to go ahead and start doing some work. The water use piece was an example, and that came through conversation around this table and with the CAO, that as we go forward, in April, we're going to be looking at the stages and how the stages for drought management will impact water usage on food production. So that was one that I threw out and said, here's a time frame. So inside of this, we would really look for, your input on this, given it's really going to impact the agricultural community. So that's one they're taking on. They're wondering, are there any others like that we're aware of, or do we just want to have it go back to them to pick out, as Director McMahon said, from the agricultural area plan? I believe they're only in operation till October or something, they were saying, and then they'll be disbanded at this point. The purpose of the agricultural area plan and this committee was to actually lay the framework for something that could start up in the community and be self-sustaining. That same evening, there was actually a meeting of a new institute, agricultural institute, to see whether or not that could be the form that it would be taking going forward. So this is what can they do between now and October that we as a board would like to see them focus on. If we don't have any priorities, they're perfectly happy going and working with the agricultural area plan and coming back, but they're wanting to see if there's anything here that we want to point them in the direction of.
Director Ties?
Yeah, so when I think of agricultural advisory commission, I do, that's basically what I had envisioned, is things like the stages, as well as any kind of water policy decisions, especially once we start metering water, and how that would impact farming communities and people that are growing food on their land, as opposed to watering lawns, and how that might change in rates and such things. So that was one big piece, and then I think also it should probably be part of a larger discussion about especially in Roberts Creek, where we'd like to retain our wooded character, but we also want to be proponents of growing your own food, and how that all fits in. So those are kind of the things that come to mind for me.
Director McMahon?
Thank you for reminding me about the water issue. That is such a horny beast that that it could probably take up all of their time between now and forever. So if we bunt that one over to them, I think we'll keep them plenty busy.
Director Hills?
Yeah. So the water sourcing policy, the timing seems to be. So I'm not sure of how staff would include the AAC in that referral process, or do we need to make a motion that they be included in the water sourcing referral process? So over to
Director Seegers?
Sorry, to what purpose? I don't know that they're going to be actually helping determine the water, like where the water is coming from. They're looking more at usage and how they would use it on, to
more drought.
Right? So I think that's the piece that could help inform staff around water usage or water sourcing, right? Like how much and where, et cetera. But I don't know if they would actually need to be involved in that conversation. But I may be redirected.
Mr. Hawley, any ideas or thoughts about that?
Thank you, Chair. In the interest of making the most advantage of the volunteer expertise that we have with the Agricultural Advisory Committee and understanding the committee's interest in being as useful and impactful as possible, the committee could direct staff to take a look at currently planned and approved work, which would certainly include water work. There may be other areas we could include in a scan, and report back to this committee with some specific suggestions of areas where the AAC could provide value to the regional district in the coming months. That might meet the intent of the recommendation and provide a link between staff's current body of work, the committee and the board's areas of focus, and the work of the AAC. Thank you.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I'm just concerned about timing. We're in February. Their next meeting is in February sometime? February 26th? I don't know the date. I don't remember the date. February something. Is it 26th?
February 26th.
Pulled out of my head. Okay, February 26th. The report from staff, even if it came back next meeting, would not actually come to them until March, right? So we're again 2 months further on before they even get that information. I agree. I mean, I agree. We need to get access to that information. There are people who are willing to come forward and provide their expertise and their knowledge, and we should take advantage of it wherever we can. And I know staff has a huge workload between now and then, so I guess I'm concerned about turnaround time on staff's part to get something to us, to get to them. I mean, we're in budget. We're piling all kinds of stuff on you guys. I'm just concerned about workload and how we'd actually facilitate having this move forward in a timely manner.
I wasn't present at this particular committee, but I can certainly see I mean, as you say, we have a certain expertise on this committee, and that's why they're there. And for them to identify what in the area of agriculture appear to be priority areas would be satisfactory to me. One thing that's coming up, and I don't know if they're involved, and that's the community food security study, if they're involved in that at all. This is one that's been undertaken by One Straw Society, and there'll be, I'm sure, comment opportunities on that and review of that at some point. It's already started. I know we received a copy that I passed on to one of our counselors to have a look at, and that came through from Dr. McKee, the regional health officer. So there's work being done on that in that area. So perhaps, Director McMahon?
I'm just wondering if, I assume that some of the members of the AAC are on the newly formed Farmers Institute, but it would be interesting to ask them for updates on what's going on with the Farmers Institute, and if indeed it may end up as inheriting the sort of the role of the AAC?
You're just wondering out loud. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't see a motion here.
Yeah, no, okay. Well, it may well be that asking them to say in the remaining term you've got, what do they consider the 3 top priorities in the area of agriculture in the Sunshine Coast that they should focus on? They could discuss that and let us know at their next meeting. Might be the appropriate. So is there a need for a motion, or is it just a matter of going back to them and saying thank them for their interest, and the board would be interested in supporting their recommendations if they have?
Chair, I think a motion would be helpful. It would make the link. Thank you.
So the motion would be appropriate then to suggest that with reference to recommendation number 3 in the minutes, that the board would welcome recommendations from the AAC with respect to 3 priority areas, including water, for the balance of their term. Moved, seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And this report is already received, so in order to receive it. So, okay, moving on to Annex L, which is the Roberts Creek Area D Advisory Planning Commission. This has also been received. So anything to discuss on this? No discussion? Okay. Annex M is the Alphastone Advisory Planning Committee, also been received. Any discussion? No discussion, thank you. Annex N, BC Ferries Key Stakeholder Update. And is this consistent with the conversation that was reported previously, Director Seegers, Director or Chair Pratt? Is there any new that we need to discuss? Comment? Yeah.
I'll be meeting with Mark Collins, CEO of BC Ferries, next week. So if directors have any items that they'd like me to bring forward, just let me know.
Director Hiltz?
Yeah, I got a question about the phrasing key stakeholder opposed to stakeholder. So key seems to be a slightly higher stakeholder than just a stakeholder. So does staff know the difference between a stakeholder and a key stakeholder?
Ian, Mr. Hall, do you have any?
Thank you for the question. Staff aren't aware of how that determination is made, but would note there is a robust project website with information about the stakeholders that are engaged, be they key or otherwise. Thank you.
Director Hiltz?
Just to follow up, yeah, my recollection is that the board appointed a couple directors to be the main contacts and to be included. That was my understanding of what the board actually appointed a couple directors to this role.
BC Ferries Committee, I believe?
For the Horseshoe Bay to become key stakeholders, and I believe it was the chair, the Town of Gibson's representative. Yeah, there was a motion from, yeah. So I'm just wondering if this is continuation and...
Director Pratt?
I attended one of the engagement pieces that was held for the key stakeholders, and so we had the directors from Area A and B at that time, as well as one of the councillors from the Town of Gibson's. There was 2 members from TRAC, as well as the executive director from Sunshine Coast Tourism. So just to give you an idea of the people that were in the room.
Okay, this, do we need a motion to receive this? This was not a report, so this is a, sorry? Received already? Okay, so we have that. Director McMahon?
Did the SCRD send in any nominees to go on the FAC.
Ferry Advisory Committee?
Yeah, because BC Ferries asked for applications, and traditionally there has been somebody from the SCRD at that committee. Did we drop the ball on that?
Obviously, we're not aware. Corporate Officer, are you aware of?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. I'm not aware of the request at this time.
Okay. Maybe we could follow that up and see if there's an opportunity to appoint to the Ferry Advisory Committee. I know that Town of Gibson's Director, or Councillor Kroll, is appointed to that committee. Okay, the next item on the agenda is on page 115, Annex O, highway regarding Highway Run 1, and it's a letter from Claire Trevina, Minister. Discussion? Okay, looks like they're going to be doing some studying. Director McMahon?
I would be curious in knowing a little more about what was involved in this review. I note that I think my only concern about the Sunday Cider application was the fact that they have a driveway going directly onto the highway in a very busy stretch there. So that merely adds ammunition to our request, the community's request to lower the speed limit between Gibsons and Lower Road.
Okay, Director Seegers?
Thank you. So I think through staff, perhaps we could make a request for details of what this study or whatever it would be looking at, so that we have some idea. And perhaps when we get it back, we may be able to actually request additional work be done or additional ideas around scope.
A resolution, that's a resolution?
Yes, please.
Seconded. Discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Anything further on that? And there's a copy of our letter. It's on page 117-18. And I've come to the end. Oh, no. What do we got here? We got a notice of motion. So this is number Annex P on our agenda, and it's a notice of motion, declaration of climate change. Director Ties.
Yes, thank you. 1 second, let me just get to the right spot here. Okay. Well, one of my main intentions is to, I was hoping that the press would be here today, but they're not. So, I'm hoping that...
You could refer to the board. Meeting for the press will be there.
Yeah, so maybe we'll...
And you'll, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, considering that the press is not here, I'm not going to read out my whole rationale behind it. You have all read it, and and it's all on the notice of motion. I'd like to open it for discussion, and well, I guess I need a seconder first.
Do you have a seconder for notice of motion? Director McMahon? Yeah. Are you seconding it?
What precisely is the motion? Is it just the section that we declare climate change emergency up to the last bullet? Is that?
That's what I see it as, yeah.
Okay. Sure, I'll second that.
Okay, seconded. So on the table for discussion, the notice of motion. Yeah. Oh, Director Lee, sorry.
I want to make sure I understand the motion that we're discussing. In the notice of motion, are we doing, and that staff reports back on the feasibility and timeframes of executing the following measures? Is that included in the motion? Yes?
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned about it passing additional costs onto our people when they build houses. I think the building code itself is quite onerous already, and we keep adding requirements to the building code. And I don't know when it becomes too onerous to build a building.
Director Tice?
As far as I know, the building step code, and maybe the staff has some more ideas to this, is a different way of looking at building compliance, and it steps away from the traditional. You have to build a wall this way, and you have to do this way. It's more of a overall performance of the building, and where you can actually choose to erect a house. I guess there's still some structural issues. As an engineer, still needs to sign off on it, but you can build a house within an envelope, and as long as that envelope going through performance testing, like a blower door test and all that kind of stuff, that they meet the requirements of that permitting without having to go through sort of the really thick traditional permit. And so you can essentially build a higher performing house than what is current code right now, but you don't necessarily have to follow the code word for word that is required, that is currently required. And as far as I know, the building code is going to get ratcheted up over the next 10 years anyway, so that everything will kind of merge as one. So this is just an additional tool that builders and architects can use to create a house that performs better than the average house does these days. I don't know if planning staff has heard of the STEP code yet, but and whether that's been a consideration. So I'd love to hear some comments from staff about it and whether it's been considered.
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair. The director's summary of the tool is correct, and to staff's knowledge, it hasn't been formally considered by the regional district in the past. It's certainly staff could report back on implications. I'm not aware of recent analysis, but typically with these types of performance enhancements, there's good accumulated data on incremental costs and the impact of that initial investment on life cycle costs, and staff could include that in responding to the motion should it pass. Thank you.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. One other thing I think we want to have information on is what would the implications be on renovations, for example? Where would those be applied there? And then just clarification from staff, and I understand the building step code has been adopted, and the step actually refers to a number of steps inside of implementation, and that municipalities would be required to adopt, they can adopt the whole thing at once, but most are not doing that, to give industry an opportunity to catch up with each step as it's implemented, because there are incremental costs and incremental impacts on those purchasing and those renovating. So look to staff for that. Thank you.
Director McMahon?
We have a community energy and emissions plan, which is a few years old now and was done before the global climate emergency became as acute as it is now. And so maybe one of the steps we should take going forward is to review our existing energy and emissions plan and update it. I kind of feel like we're taking a shotgun approach here, and maybe some of this we should refer to our strategic planning session, because I hate to get too specific when we're not quite sure what we're asking for and what the implications are in terms of staffing and expense.
Director Ties?
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, and I think that essentially what I did was when I created that climate emergency, I didn't just want to kind of leave it hanging out there, but actually wanted to create some actionable steps there that we may look into. That being said, I don't think that they are the full list of what we could do, or it, we may not take all of these steps. I just thought that as part of a rationale to declare the climate emergency, there's a necessity to also maybe have some actionable items behind it. Otherwise, it'd be a fairly useless tool. And, I was looking at the measures that the City of Vancouver put in place, and they have somewhat different circumstances, so they weren't really all that translatable. But I took some guidance from what they're doing and kind of translated it to our regional district level at this point. So these are just suggestions as to how much we can do, and I'm also very aware that some of these items that I listed are also a huge burden on staff. So there's definitely a greater discussion to be had, and so I think the suggestion that staff had is just to have a look at the feasibility and timeframes of actually looking at these measures. Just a sort of a quick overview on what the scope of some of these would be appreciated, and I'm certainly not expecting all of them to be actioned, and especially not right now. So that was just my rationale behind building all of this. But I do think that the strategic plan and whether climate change does end up being one of our priority items is certainly something that we need to look at before we get into deep on this one. But from the strategic planning session, this is sort of what I gathered from it was that climate change was a big priority, and that this was, and I thought this is a good time to bring it up because we just approved the application for a well site that costs $3.1 million, and it can be contributed 100% to climate change, and as well as the increase of water rates that we are looking at right now. And so just around budget time, I think it's a good time to point out to the citizens that we are in no longer in a status quo world where the world is changing around us, and we're looking at some real costs coming down the pipeline. And that's sort of the whole intention behind this for the timing right now, and being aware that the strategic plan might shift our priorities at some point.
I'm going to speak. Yeah. From my perspective with Gibson's, we haven't put this on the table yet, and I think that I'd like to see it as a regional approach response, because you can't have a climate emergency in the regional district and not have it in Sechelt and Gibson's. So it is one thing, though, and I don't know what it means to declare a climate emergency. Does that mean it takes precedence? I mean, we can't declare a climate emergency and then not make it our number one priority in terms of our strategic plan. And I just want to suggest cautious and more study. There are a number of communities who are declaring a climate emergency, but the UN has already done that, and so that we are in a worldwide situation of climate emergency, which we acknowledge We have referred this to AVICC for debate and discussion, and that's going to be coming up in April as a recommendation. And we're going to be hearing a lot more about it. My sense is that acknowledging that there's a worldwide climate emergency, acknowledging the work that's being done elsewhere is very important, and to acknowledge that in the context of our planning and our strategic plans is important, is something we need to always be focusing on. I just, at some point, we may well declare a climate emergency, and then we've got to react. I mean, we've got to make that our number one priority throughout, because the community will be looking for that response from us. And I would say that in place of providing a list at this time to staff and say, and these are the items we want to look at, there may be a lot more that we need to look at and should look at. And we have an upcoming intergovernmental meeting. Again, this is an ideal conversation for all of our communities to have together, and arising out of that, because we all need to be coordinated on this response. And so I guess the second thing I have, and I'd just like to ask to our corporate officer, a notice of motion, is that a notice of motion to be adopted at the meeting at which it's presented, or is that a notice of motion to be put forward to a future meeting?
Thank you. So because the notice was provided before the agenda went out, it was included on the agenda to be considered at today's meeting.
At today's meeting, okay. All right. So I'll go next then to Director Seegers.
Thank you. I think there's widespread acceptance of the fact that we are all being impacted by climate change and that we should do something. But I don't think there's a general understanding of what the impact on a personal level of dealing with climate change would be up and down the coast on individuals, on businesses, etc. So I'm all in favor of doing this, and I think we need to do more work with the community around what those implications are. So I think it's going to have to be a staged approach in that we say, yes, we recognize that there is climate change is an issue, and it has come to the stage where we could declare it an emergency, and these are some of the implications that we see on a region, on all of the various constituent populations, businesses, residences, farms, everything, and take that out to the community, and they're going to have more for us. But it's a conversation then that we look at, okay, which ones with community support will we take on? Because until they actually see the implications of some of these, if we just go ahead and say, this is what we're doing, we're going to get huge pushback, even though they believe that we need to deal with climate change. So I think it's a conversation that we need to move forward. So I agree with you bringing this forward and having it on our agenda. And I think there's more work to do, and I don't know how we reflect that in what you've got here. Okay, thanks.
Director Ty's response?
So, yeah, so it sounds to me like what might be a good idea is to sort of have that as an agenda item for the intergovernmental meeting, and then kind of to discuss some maybe first steps there as to how we want to approach this. And so maybe I'd alter the motion and say that we discuss climate change at the next intergovernmental meeting, and the next steps to communicate to the public, or better steps to communicate to the public how climate change may be affecting them in a tangible way. I don't know, something like that.
Director Sears?
I think we go a little further than that. I mean, I think staff already seeing some of the impacts in the area and could anticipate some of the impacts on building, et cetera, and, the water infrastructure and all of those kinds of things. And I think that's information that could help inform that conversation at the intergovernmental meeting, rather than just saying, okay, we need to, and some of us attended the climate action workshop, right? So we're aware of some of that, but I think staff are in a position where they can actually inform us of some of the implications at the regional district, which could come forward there. And I don't know the timing. I think we're looking at March something for the intergovernmental meeting. So timing may not work to get that to come forward prior.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, I would like to defer the motion until we have had our intergovernmental meeting, our strategic planning, and I think AVICC, because I think we may get some very good direction from other municipalities and regional districts who are trying to grapple with the same problem.
Director Tice, did you have your hand up at one point? Oh, sorry, not Director Tice. Sorry, Director Hill says,
Sorry, there's a motion.
Hills.
Point of order. If we're doing a deferral motion, do we actually continue discussion at that point? And I'd look to the corporate officer for that. I think a deferral motion actually limits conversation at that point.
Thank you. So the motion to postpone is you would no longer debate the motion, but you could debate the merits of postponing.
Okay, I'd like to comment on the merits of postponing it. I do think there's merit in bringing forward acknowledgement of the SCRD concern about climate change at this time. And I think that I recognize that, and I was going to suggest some wording to that effect to Director Tice, if he would accept that. I was going to suggest that the SCRD acknowledge the findings of the IPCC report on climate change and refer the issue for urgent discussion at the forthcoming intergovernmental meeting.
That sounds good to me.
So that's my comment discussion on the deferral. And that is that we would go in a different direction. And we would defer the discussion, but we would defer it over to that.
Yeah. So sounds like that we want to have the deferral, and then what Director Beamish just mentioned.
So do we vote on second the deferral, do we vote on the deferral then, and then look at your motion after that?
Yeah. Do that, yeah. That would get us, so motion, where did we refer to? Well, we defer to a specific time would be to the intergovernmental. Is that what we would defer to in your motion?
I had originally said to defer until after AVICC. But we can vote on that motion and then get back to the,
Okay, vote on the motion to defer then. All in favor? We need a second. Oh, seconded? Okay. Didn't need a seconder if it didn't get seconded. Okay.
Wait, but if you agree to defer, then we can't amend your motion. So we have to vote me down in order to get back to amending.
Or it doesn't, or not second it.
Or not second it.
Process. So if we defer this to after AVICC, could we not also then take this report and refer it to the intergovernmental meeting?
We could, yeah. I think we could still have our because we're going to want to have some discussion. Is the AVICC before intergovernment? No, intergovernment
no, it's
before.
It's after.
Yeah, so it'd be good to have the discussion ourselves. So.
Intergovernmental, I still see 2 dates, either March or May.
Yeah. I think March is what's being confirmed. I think that's what Carrie Ann said yesterday. March is the one where we're getting most responses to.
Then AVICC will
be after that, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so where were we? Do you know where we are?
So second.
We have a second for the deferral to
deferral
second
after AVICC.
To AVICC.
To after AVICC.
To after AVICC. Okay. Okay. All in favor of the deferral till after AVICC. Okay. Okay. I think I am. Okay. However, now we could make a resolution for discussion of the
Yes.
issue.
So I would
Yeah.
make a motion that this notice of motion and all supporting background information be provided to attendees at the forthcoming intergovernmental meeting for discussion on the agenda.
All in favor? Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Tice, for your work on this. I appreciate you taking the initiative. I know it's an interest at our table, and they're following closely the ABICC resolution, and now they'll be looking forward to the discussion. So, Directors?
I'd just like to also agree with that. I appreciate all of the work that you've done into this, because I've seen a few of the drafts coming through from Director Ties. Been very impressed. I also like that this is actually taking a very proactive approach rather than a punitive approach towards other industry, and it's asking us to do better here and approach and look at our practice and doing better within our own jurisdiction to help support the emergency altogether. So thank you very much, Director Ties.
Thank you. And with your agreement, I'd like to also bring this forward to the councillors in Gibsons.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Director Lee.
I'd just like to say thanks to Director Tees for bringing this up, and I in fact agree with most of the things that are written in here. My issue is which one do we do first and what can we afford to do? That's all. Yeah. And the closing on page 120 is absolutely excellent, so thank you.
Oh, I don't know. Seconded, all in favor? Go, Mr. Lamb.
Yeah, I've just got a question. So just like today, so the Largo Road project, they gave us a park dedication, and then they gave us 2.7% cash. That money has to go into the park reserve. Yeah, I just kind of wondering, like the way they laid the park out and the way they tied it all in is perfect. And but I'm just kind of, the other side of it is when you went into the the beach access. There was a picture of the beach access down on Gower Point. Is when you looked at the picture, you see all these little park dedications all over the place, and I'm going like, is there a potential to take that 2.7% and put it into somewhere else? I guess we need the money in parks to develop our parks and keep our parks running, but.
You're thinking of the Gibsons Community Market, aren't you? You could put it there.
Yeah. I was thinking about that, yeah. Well, here we have climate change. I mean, here's some money we could throw at climate change. But I just, I just see it, every time somebody does a subdivision, there's another piece of park or another piece of land that goes into a park, or else they give you, monies in lieu. But I guess maybe understanding where that money goes.
Mr. Hall, would you like to talk about the restrictions on the use of that money?
Thank you, Chair. You read my mind. The Park Acquisition Fund is a special fund that is restricted in its use to the acquisition of lands, and so it can't be used for operations. Additionally, staff could comment, though, that the further refinement of a park acquisition plan is on the longer-term work plan for the Park Service. Currently, staff are guided by official community plans primarily, and by the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, but there's certainly an opportunity to do more work there. And that extends to how parks are managed as well, and that's part of service planning work that's happening in parks. Thanks.
So voting on the motion to adjourn? Thank you. Replies? Director Pratt?
Yeah, it is an incredibly wide stretch of the highway there because you have 4 lanes. There's 2 turning lanes there. Plus, when you also add the pull out for the bus as well, it's because I've had to pick up children there before because my daughter's best friend lives right around that area, and just horrified at the speed of the traffic. It's constant. It's a very wide stretch of road, so it's scary, especially in a very residential area, so rural area.